Hey, good morning. Just exciting morning to be outside. And so I just thought we'd spend a few moments just looking at James together outside. So you're going to hear some traffic sounds. You may hear some sirens before it's over with and a dog bark, but that's okay. Um, we just want to step back into James chapter 5 and in verse 7 through 12. James points out really four things here. One is to be patient. Two is to establish your hearts. Third is don't grumble against one another. And then fourth is let your yes be yes. And so I need you to read James chapter 5, 7 through 12, and just ingest all the truth that God has for us there. But the points that I want to make, the first one is talking about being patient. Being patient, James says, until the coming of the Lord. Being patient here does not imply sitting quietly in the corner without being effective. See, you can be patient while working very hard, very determined, very focused in your work to be the best husband, wife, to be the best employee, to be the best father or mother, best church member. Being patient, working hard, filling those roles. You see, being patient doesn't mean being idle. There's so much more to be done in this process of waiting on the return of the Lord. During this crazy time, we need to be patient, right? What is patience? What's the definition of patience? The definition of patience is the capacity to accept or to tolerate delay, trouble, suffering without getting angry, without being upset. James uses a farmer here as an example, waiting on the rain, waiting on the growth of the plant, waiting on the time of harvest. But the farmer always has lots to do, plenty to do in the process. See, during this crazy time, we need to be patient. We need to be steady-minded during these moments, but we don't need to be idle. There's much to be done. The next point that James brings up, and he calls us to, and I love this, it is to establish your hearts. This is in verse 8. James says, establish your hearts. See, I love this terminology. Establishing your heart in the power, in the faithfulness, in the love, in the righteousness, in the holiness of Jesus. Establish your heart. Let your faith be firm without wavering. Establish your heart in the truth of God. Read His Word. Hide His Word in our heart. Set aside our opinions and find out what God's truth is. And ask Him for understanding. Ask Him for wisdom on how to implement this truth into our daily life. You see, we need to be people who have established our hearts in who Jesus is and in the life of Jesus so that we can model Him, so that we can represent Him, and that we can fight off the lies of Satan. Establish your hearts in the truth of God. Read His Word. Hide His Word in our heart. Set aside our opinions and find out the truth of God. Ask Him for understanding so that we know His truth well. Ask Him for wisdom how to implement that into our life and apply that to our life. We can fight off the lies of Satan and live in the truth of Jesus. And thirdly, do not grumble against one another. James uses the example of Job here. In these moments of waiting that we're in right now, It's easy to get frustrated because Satan is throwing his fiery darts at us. And we get weary. We get tired. In these moments, we can lose focus. And when we take our eyes off the prize, off the task that's before us, we find ourselves putting it on people around us, on our family and on our friends, on our neighbors. And they become our targets. And we start whining and complaining and grumbling. And we start saying things to them and about them that should not have been said. We take our frustration out on them by cutting them down, by being short with them, by saying the things we should not say. We're complaining about them to them. And James is saying, stay focused. Staying focused on the life of Christ. Right? That life that Jesus is drawing us to daily. Don't lose focus on God's truth and let the lies of Satan take hold in our heart. Stay focused on the truth of the Lord. And then finally, James says here in verse 12, he gives us a warning about invoking, about using God's name to guarantee truth, right? And instead he calls for us to be truthful in everything, and to be so consistent in our truth and in our lives that we don't have to take an oath, and there's no oath needed to show people or to allow people to hear truth out of our mouth. What I mean by this is we need to be people in everyday life, in every situation, that we are constant truth tellers. We don't need to be people of lies. We don't need to be people of white lies. We don't need to be people of false witness. James is saying, don't make promises in the Lord's name. He's saying, don't swear on the Bible unless you're in court of law and they ask you to swear on the Bible. Don't just say, I swear on the Bible. No, be a person who's so consistent in truth that people know what you're saying is truth without you having to make that kind of oath. Don't swear on the Lord's name. He's saying, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And people know it to be true. You see, God is a God of truth. And James says here, we need to be men and women of truth. We need to be men and women of the person and the nature and the character of God. Truth, holiness, righteousness. So good to see you this morning. I hope the noise out here didn't bother you, but I really enjoyed being outside. I hope to see you soon.